Welcome to American Pulse. النهارده احنا جايين لكم من واشنطن دي سي العاصمة الأمريكية، وتحديدا مجلس الشيوخ في مجلس النواب الكونجرس الأمريكي. النبض الأمريكي قام بتحضير لمؤتمر إدراج الجماعة الإخوان المسلمين كجماعة إرهابية في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية بالتعاون مع مركز لندن للأبحاث الاستراتيجية والسياسية. المؤتمر دوت جاي في توقيت مهم جدا، لأن في قانون في مجلس النواب بيتوافق عليه دلوقتي لإدراج هذه الجماعة كجماعة إرهابية، وكان من الواجب إن احنا نديلهم خبرتنا كمصريين ازاي تعاملنا مع هذا التنظيم الإرهابي. وفي نفس الوقت من الواضح إن في هجوم كبير على الجماعات الإرهابية من الغرب بعد ما الأحداث الأخيرة في تفجيرات أورلاندو في فرنسا. فالحقيقة العالم ابتدى يفهم دلوقتي مدى خطورة هذا التنظيم الإرهابي. يلا تعالوا معانا نشوف ايه اللي حصل في المؤتمر ونتكلم عن خبرتنا مع الإخوان المسلمين في مصر.
My name is Ellie Gold. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. Before we get started, just a couple things here. If we can please shut off our cell phones, or at least put it on silent, if not anything else. We also, I'm told that there is an Arabic interpreter, so if anybody needs headphones, they're available. In the back, I guess. Okay. Okay, so we have a fantastic panel today discussing the Muslim Brotherhood and its relationship to militant Islam. I know that there are a number of bills both in the House and the Senate along these lines, and I thought it would be a good idea to at least have some discussion about this and see what the deal is. I, as moderator, am going to not participate in the conversation, but rather just moderate and let everybody else do the talking. Samantha? Okay, so my name is Ellie Gold. I'm the Vice President of the London Center. The London Center has been was formed in the beginning of in January of 2013, and the focus was the purpose was to focus on national security and foreign policy related issues. I know that the congressman has votes about 130. I know another congressman is going to be joining us, Darrell Issa, and he also has votes about 130, I would imagine. So let's get this, as they say, the road on the show. What I've done is I'm going to introduce each panelist as it's their turn to speak, and I'm going to give one sentence and then ask the panelists themselves to give a brief bio as to their background. So we have with us Congressman Louis Gohmert from Texas 1. Anyone who focuses on these issues knows exactly where he stands. So as they say, I don't know that he needs much more of an intro than that. Congressman?
Thank you. Well, it is a pleasure to be here, and I love... Can I call you Mr. Vice President? I sure like that. I love that idea. Anyway, it's great to be here. It's great to be invited to be part of the London Center for Policy Research. Folks there, I've seen, they get it. They understand how at risk things are. But it is important, I think, to understand the relativity of things. This is not just an issue of radical Islam, although that is an issue. Carlos the Jackal, y'all heard of Carlos the Jackal. You know, he had commented some time back that the best way to bring down the United States is for socialists and, Islamists to join forces. That it was not possible with either one, but together they could bring us down. And I was hearing a while ago that there may be a day of rage in America in the next few days where people are trying to stir things up here. Now, I've been called all kinds of names and had my intellect questioned. I know how well I did on national standardized testing. I'm okay. And I know just in the last couple of weeks, in trying to engage in debate on the issue of what killed these innocent folks at the Orlando nightclub, and in the wee hours, I pointed out that it was radical Islam that killed these innocent victims. And immediately, Congressman from New Jersey yelled, "Then you're a racist." Now that confused me because I didn't realize Islam was a race. I thought there were people from many different races that believed in Islam. So that was intriguing. I said, he said he was pledging allegiance to the Islamic State. And I was told, "So you're a racist." Anyway, it's hard to debate people that are coming from that position. And I said, he said himself he pledged allegiance to the Islamic State, to their leader, and then the gentlelady, who's got her own legal issues at this time, but she got in my face and said, "That's a lie because it happened in my district." And I said, "No, these words came from his own mouth. We have a recording of him pledging allegiance to the Islamic State." And her debate point that's hard to argue with was, "That's a lie because it happened in my district." And I said, "Your Attorney General, Loretta Lynch," I know she thinks she's a great Attorney General. She said he pledged allegiance to the Islamic State, and the response was clearly, "That's a lie because it happened in my district." Sometimes it's hard to really engage in meaningful debate, but I want to take you back to December 22nd, a story published in Egypt's Rose El Yusuf magazine, approved by the Muslim Brotherhood. It was written while Morsi was president, the Muslim Brotherhood president of Egypt. And I've quoted from this story and been called an Islamophobe because I quoted from a story that the Muslim Brotherhood was proud of. And in this story, they proudly named 6 people who turned the White House, quote, "from a position hostile to Islamic groups and organizations in the world to the largest and most important supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood," unquote. The 6 people named were Arif Ali Khan, Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security for Policy Development, and again, this story was December 22nd of 2012. Mohammed Al-Biari, member of the Homeland Security Advisory Council, also from Texas. Of course, the Muslim Brotherhood calls their party in Egypt the Freedom and Justice Party. And amazingly, he started a charity, lost their 501c3 status when they wouldn't properly report, but he calls it the Freedom and Justice Charity. So anyway, a foundation rather. And I kept warning, look, the guy was a featured speaker at the Ayatollah Khomeini Man of Vision for the 20th century. He was a featured speaker. We don't know what was said there, but he was listed as a featured speaker to pay tribute. And I kept pointing out he was very defensive of the Holy Land Foundation trial, that it was wrong, even after they were convicted, clearly proving that they supported terrorism. He defended them repeatedly. And finally, after a couple of years of warning, actually 3 years of warning about his ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and support for people who had ties to radical Islam, he tweeted out after an American was killed on video that the international caliphate was inevitable, so we just need to warm up to the idea. At that, finally, Homeland Security said, well, his term is up as a top advisor, so we'll go ahead and let his term expire. Anyway, Rashad Hussain, the U.S. Special Envoy to the Organization of the Islamic Conference, Salam al-Mariyati, the co-founder of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, Imam Mohammed Majid, president of the Islamic Society of North America. He was at that time. He also very close confidant of the president. The president consulted him. Apparently, he helped him with the president's speech in May of 2011, where the president was trying to upstage Prime Minister Netanyahu. He was on his way to address AIPAC here and also to speak to a joint session in Congress. The president went to the State Department. Mohammed Majid was there in the inner sanctum of the State Department. He was there and, taking credit for assisting the president. And then we have Ibu Patel, a member of the President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. Anyway, it's just rather amazing. Also wanted you to note that as of December 7, 2011, the Holy Land Foundation convictions were affirmed on all counts, and the three-judge panel unanimous 170-page opinion, despite what Mr. Albieri said about it being gross injustice, the panel unanimously said that Hamas was created by Muslim Brotherhood operatives in 1987 as the Brotherhood's, quote, Palestinian branch, unquote. Thereafter, quote, the Muslim Brotherhood directed its worldwide chapters to establish so-called Palestinian committees to support Hamas from abroad. In the U.S., the Palestine Committee was led by Musa Abu Marzouk, who for a time in the early 90s actually ran Hamas from his home in Virginia. The Palestine Committee created not only the Holy Land Foundation, but a number of other Islamic entities in the U.S. The leaders of one of those entities, the Islamic Association of Palestine, subsequently created CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, which was cited as an unindicted co-conspirator in the case and is one of the most prominent to be heard around the country. Then I wanted to quickly mention a couple of quotes from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's own pleading. He wrote it himself. He had books helping him do the translation at Gitmo, and I'm sure he's up next to be released from Gitmo. But he said, these are his own words. He's a smart guy. He may be crazy, but he's a very smart guy. He hates Americans. He said, in God's book, he ordered us to fight you everywhere we find you. Even if we were inside the holiest of all holy cities, the mosque in Mecca and the holy city of Mecca, and even during sacred months. In God's book, verse 9, Al-Taba, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them and seize them and besiege them and lie in wait for them in each and every ambush. He goes through in very legalistic form, cites the premise for killing Americans, and then gives a quote from the Quran. He's a very intelligent, well-educated on the Quran. He says, God has demonstrated to us your mental and your defeated fighting moral status. Our religion is a religion of fear and terror to the enemies of God, the Jews, the Christians, and pagans. With God's willing, we are terrorists to the bone. So many thanks to God. And then he quotes from an Arab poet, we will terrorize you as long as we live with swords, fire, and airplanes. He forgot to mention guns, which is why we got to outlaw guns, but I'm sure he was thinking guns instead of just saying swords, fire, and airplanes. Anyway, he says, we will make all our materials available to defend and deter and egress you and the filthy Jews from our country. God has ordered us to spend for jihad in this cause. Then finally, he says, we fight you and destroy you and terrorize you. The jihad is God's cause and a great duty in our religion. We have news for you. The news is you will be greatly defeated in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that America will fall politically, militarily, and economically. Your end is very near, and your fall will be just as the fall of the towers on the blessed 9/11 day. We will raise from the ruins, God willing. We will leave this imprisonment with our noses raised high in dignity as the lion emerges from his den. We shall pass over the blades of the sword into the gates of heaven. So we ask God to accept our contributions to the great attack on America, and to place our 19 martyred brethren among the highest peaks in paradise. These are not friends of the United States. And the sooner people in America understand just the depth of the hatred here, then the sooner we will be able to defeat them. They have a strong foothold in the United States because of the goodness of the American hearts, not wanting to think people could be filled with this much hate. But it's there, it's a reality, and we have got to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, following Louis Gohmert is always, it's impossible. So rather than repeat, let me just have a positive contrast. People around the world who hate us, hate us. They are the minority. People around the world who organize hate, in fact, increase those numbers. And that's ultimately, when we talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, what it's all about. It's an organization that systematically promotes and increases hatred for Christians, for Jews, for the great Satan, the little Satan, in a Sunni version of what happens in Iran. Point that I'd like to leave you with, because I think talking points for all of us are extremely important, because you have to communicate to a great many people who don't understand, who are told, well, the Muslim Brotherhood is just another political organization, or Hezbollah is another political organization. The fact is, if you do not change a name from a name that is known for murder and hate, then you choose to try to remain a leopard, keep your teeth intact, chew on someone while telling them that you become a pussycat. And that is where the Muslim Brotherhood was in the 80s after the assassination of Sadat. That's where they are today. And during the intervening period, they became politically significant enough that with an incredible misstep by the United States and other countries, we allowed Egypt to fall into a form of turmoil, to have a political misalignment that allowed them to come to power. And in the short period in which they were in power, they did not show all of the truths, but they showed a great many truths. The effects on Egypt are profound enough that Egypt made the decision to call the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization, to ban them. And when you look at the on-the-street popularity of that decision, it goes without saying that, in fact, that is the will of the people of Egypt. So when we're looking as outsiders to the Muslim Brotherhood, what I ask us to do is to look at it in two tiers. Well, who they were when they took the name, who they were when they committed terrorist acts, who they were when they took power, and who they are today and will be if, in fact, we do not treat them as what they are and will always be under the name of the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think it's most insightful for us to realize that you can go from terrorist organization to terrorist organization, and you can realize that as long as they are willing to keep that name and the moniker and the slogans, they will not truly change their spots. And I think where Mr. Gohmert did a good job of defining some current rhetoric, I think for us in Congress, what we have to do is ask the people closest to the problem, what do they think? And in my many trips, and I note that my good friend Nick Rahal is here, in our many trips to the region, we met with the people who wanted peace and wanted prosperity for their people and were trying to achieve it, both in the business and the government. And what we discovered is this is, in fact, their decision to call the Muslim Brotherhood what it is and will always be, an organization of hate, It may have political aims, but those aims are much more similar to the aims that Iran enjoys after their forming of a caliphate. That is their goal. That is what I think we need to fight. So I didn't come here to make any longer a speech than that, and I could not dream of following Louis Gohmert and making it half as eloquent, but thank you.
Thank you, congressmen. What we have decided to do here today is, because I know that we have a lot of speakers, and I've passed out cards with for questions, and that towards the end of the discussion they'll be passed forward. If anybody has any questions, I would for the congressmen, since they have to go by in 5 minutes or 6 minutes.
More time.
Feel free to email them to us, and then we can forward it on to your offices. Does that work?
We can take a couple if you've got time,
Sure. Okay. In that case.
I'm David Pollock from the Zionist Organization of America. Just to be clear, you mentioned the name change is a symptom of the fact that they hadn't changed their spots. If they should decide to change their names, which many Muslim groups in the United States have done, unfortunately, over and over again to confuse some Americans, surely look forward that to be done with simply changing the name of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Do you have a list in your mind about what the minimum requirements would be?
That's an excellent question, and I sort of mentioned it, and I said they haven't changed their rhetoric, and I think that's where the quotations of Louis come into mind. There are three elements that always go when you're trying to follow terrorism. There's the names of the organization, there's the rhetoric or themes, and then lastly, of course, there are the people and their tactics. So if you wanted to say, is there an organization that can be divorced from being the Muslim Brotherhood? Well, one, people of hate and terror seldom change their spots, and when they do, they almost always reject a status organization and go out on their own. That hasn't happened. Secondly, name changes do, as you say, do occur periodically, and when they do, if the people move, or the tactics move, or a combination of the two, you follow it. So I have no doubt the Muslim Brotherhood will continue to have its name because it has stuck to it for 80 years. But there are, as you know, organizations such as ISIS in the Sinai who have become much more directly militant, openly hostile, and are today killing and ambushing Egyptian soldiers as we speak, and who have blown up countless number, and by the way, who have also attacked and attempt to kill people on our peacekeeping base, which is obviously a multi-nation base that we had in the Sinai and have for almost half a century.
Okay, so we have time for two questions, Colin, and then Michael.
It's Colin from Houston, Texas. A question about between the videos and we're racist. When can the Congress do, or we as a nation to start? If you remember, Reagan identified the enemy. He stood up and said the evil empire, the nation was behind it. It was a political leader at the top identifying the United States enemy. I haven't seen that in 80 years. I've seen all the videos. It's really not that. It's the guns. They're racist. What can we do? Because until the nation recognizes, as America recognizes, its leaders recognize the enemy, then we can help these other nations like Egypt and others, I think. What can you do? What can Congress do other than showing the door to the current administration to get this out and say, look, the United States recognizes it. We're not racist. This is the enemy. This is the issue. Not be afraid and fearful. And let's hit this head on. What's your opinion there? Because that's it, changing the message, right? They're changing the message.
Exactly. Well, most members of Congress are very brave, and once they see that the American public supports something, they'll get behind it. And so, but seriously, there's truth in what I'm saying. What we have seen from the radicals are great activism. You would think that some of them would be more reluctant to step forward and be identified with the radical movement and condemning anybody that points out the real evil at work here. But that small minority has taken hold of the largest mouthpiece. But I can assure you, if enough Americans make clear that they want their member of Congress or senator to be outspoken on what the reality is, and that radical Islam is a threat, and that we need to recognize it and call it what it is, you will be amazed at the number of people here in Washington that will step forward and say, it's radical Islam. One of my Democrat friends who was in the ensemble yelling against me, when we were leaving the floor, and it's just him and me, he said, I've called it radical Islam for years now. Well, that's nice to whisper to me at the door. Why don't you say it down there in the well like you have everything else? But once it's acceptable because American majorities have let their voices be heard, you will hear it all over Washington. But Americans have got to step up.
Well, Louis gave you appropriately the domestic side of it. I'll take a chance to give the other side. American members of the House and the Senate, and hopefully an administration, we have to give voice to those voices around the world that cannot be easily heard. So when Egypt, no small country, declares the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization, if we join with them and we add them explicitly to the list, we in fact give great amplification to that voice. And the same can be said of emerging terrorist groups around the world. Boko Haram, many of them have become sort of part of the ISIS Brotherhood affiliation. But the administration has often been slow to add. There's a sensitivity that, we don't know which way it's going. So it's good to have the State Department with you when you go overseas. It's good to come home and amplify what you really see and hear, and that often allows what the State Department will not do for various sensitive reasons to be done here. So I think that's part of our role, is listen to voices in America, we represent them. Listen to the voices around the world, because if America doesn't lead, often there is no one to follow.
If I could add, end of August last year, I think the world of President Sisi, despite apparently from what people say that I'm an Islamophobe, I'm not afraid of Muslims, and we have some very dear friends, and I think President Sisi is one of them. He allowed me to meet, they said at that time I was the only member of Congress that was allowed to meet with the Director of Intelligence for about 2.5 hours. We've got some friends over there, and they understand what radical Islam is. They're Muslim. They don't want radical Islam, just like our Northern Alliance friends in Afghanistan. They don't want radical Islamists controlling Afghanistan, Egypt, Jordan. Didn't get to meet with Abdullah a couple of weeks ago, but met the king, with his uncle and also his son. And we've got some real friends there, and they recognize the danger of radical Islam. Those are people we should be working with, like Daryl says.
Can you take one more question?
Sure.
One question?
Yes, please. Middle East Agency, Egypt. I just want to wonder, what's your role as a congressman or as the Congress in making any draft resolutions in order to ban the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, especially that you have said that, or the congressman said that we have to listen to the overseas as we have to listen to the Americans themselves. So what's your role, given that the Muslim Brotherhood is known as the cloak of most of the terrorist organizations?
Well, like you're obviously plugged in and aware, we have a bill to name the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization to take the lead from our Muslim friends in Egypt that recognize the threat, and the UAE, our Muslim friends there, they have recognized the threat. And frankly, their leaders in Middle Eastern countries, normally when we visit with these leaders, there'll be camera opportunities, and then the reporters have to leave. And then in the private meetings, it's not uncommon to get, "What's wrong with you? You keep helping the Muslim Brotherhood. Do you not understand they have been at war with you for 40 years? When are you going to stop helping your enemy?" And some of us wonder the same thing. But the movement is growing, and that's why I'm so pleased with the London Center, because they get it. And by doing events like this, more people become aware of what the real truth is. We're not Islamophobes. We have no problems with Muslims. We have problems with radical Muslims that want to destroy not only America, but the Democratic Republic in Egypt and the leadership in Jordan and places where they're friends. So thank you for being plugged in, and thank you for knowing enough to ask a question like that. I'm hoping by events like this, more people will notify their members of Congress to join those of us that are co-sponsors of the bill. And when we have enough co-sponsors, our leadership will bring it to the floor, and that'll be the first step on our way to actually recognizing our enemy officially. So thank you.
Congressman, do you know the bill number by chance?
I don't have the bill number, but all you have to do is say the bill that recognizes the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, and it's not hard to find. But
HR 38.
thank you very much.
There you go.
Speaking of being plugged in, there you go.
Thanks.
You. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
I'm going to, our next speaker I'm going to ask is the London Center's president, Herb London, for his remarks. Herb?
It is a great pleasure to be with you, and I would be very remiss if I didn't point out that my dear friend Bud McFarlane is with us today, former security advisor to Ronald Reagan. Bud, thank you for joining us. There are lots of things that I want to say, but first let me tell you a little story. The story is appropriate for Louis Gohmert before he leaves. There are three very important lessons in life a wise man once told me about. One is never to climb a wall that leans towards you, never to kiss a woman that leans away from you, and never speak after Louis Gohmert. Now, I got a big problem because Congressman Gohmert has, I think, covered this area very well indeed. But let me point out a couple of things that were not mentioned during the course of this presentation. The first is that the Muslim Brotherhood has had ties to hate organizations from its very beginning in 1928. There were ties to the Nazis in the 1930s, some of you will recall. There was the funding of Al-Qaeda. The first funding of Al-Qaeda came from the Muslim Brotherhood. And then in addition, we now see the Muslim Brotherhood has ties to ISIS. So when we talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, we're talking about an organization that has been involved with terrorism since its origins in the late 1920s. The other point that I would like to make is that when Mubarak fell, that was the first revolution of two revolutions in recent times in Egypt, but when Mubarak fell, there was no organization that could follow politically. As a consequence, the Muslim Brotherhood was organized, did run Morsi. Morsi, you may remember, said, "I will never run for president." Well, he did run for president, and he was elected. As a consequence, there were people in our State Department who believed that because he was elected democratically, we should support him. The consequence of that is that there was a charm campaign organized by our State Department that had Muslim Brotherhood members travel the country and suggest that they were really quite moderate, very much interested in the United States, very willing to deal with minorities in their own country, including the Coptic population, and so an impression was created. This was very interesting because I went to a Council of Foreign Relations meeting where there were 5 of the most attractive people I've ever seen in my life were seated in front of me. They were all members of the Muslim Brotherhood. Each one wore a $500 suit. The young lady who was there looked like a young Oberon. A very attractive woman wearing a scarf. There was a Prada scarf. They were outfitted perfectly. They came right out of Central Caste. And the impression was created, these are reasonable people that you can deal with. Now, what the Egyptians told the world is that they are not so easy to deal with. And after a year, you had the second revolution with 33 million Egyptians on the streets of Egypt. And what was, there are 90 million people in the country. 1/3 of that population was on the streets of Egypt, demonstrating against Morsi. And al-Sisi was the man who became the hero because Morsi said, fire on those demonstrators. He refused to do so. As a consequence, he became a national hero. And of course, later elected president of the country. But the one thing that people overlook, and to which we are given scant attention, al-Sisi gave a speech at Al-Azhar roughly a year and a half ago. That speech was very interesting because he said we have violence within our religion. And at the end of it, he used the words, we need a revolution from within. Now, one might have assumed when a speech of that kind is given, that it would be embraced by the President of the United States and by every American. It was given scant attention. Aside from a one-inch reproduction in the Wall Street Journal, I could not find an editorial anywhere in the United States that paid attention to al-Sisi's speech, which was a little like Martin Luther's speech talking about the 95 Theses, challenging his own religion to deal with the questions of militancy and extremism. And that was, in my judgment, a remarkable moment that we should have seized on. If you want to deal with people who want to kill you, one of the ways to deal with them is to say, let's find those within the religion, pious Muslims, who are eager for some kind of systematic change. Al-Sisi was that person, he's that person. And it seems to me that more should be done in the United States to give attention to that effort. It is also true that the Muslim Brotherhood, as a result of what was happening during the Morsi years, has penetrated many of the organizations in the United States, now attempting to sanitize itself. And this is a great danger. So we no longer recognize an enemy that is within. It is now seen as a legitimate voice of the Muslim people. It is not a legitimate voice. It's an extremist voice. And what we have done at the London Center is not only spend time on this, but we have a new book that I urge you to get on Amazon, only $15, excuse me for the commercial pitch. It's called The Encyclopedia of Militant Islam, which deals with 44 of the major terrorist groups in the world and what they're attempting to accomplish. Now, in general, we know what they want to accomplish. The caliphate, of course, the introduction of Sharia, the use of jihad as a methodology. But what we do not know are the tactics of individual organizations, where they exist, what kind of funding they get. That is incorporated into this book so that we can start to understand who the enemy is and what we have to do. Now, there's often the question, what does the United States have before it? It has an enormous challenge. It has a challenge that in some ways is unprecedented, but not completely. People forget that we are fighting a war not only in the battlefield, not only with guns and bullets, we are fighting an ideological war against this radical Islamic threat. And how do you fight that kind of war? Well, you not only fight it by being on the battlefield and being successful and not providing people with a safe zone, we also fight it on an ideological front. And we have a template for it. It's called the Cold War. We fought communism not only in the battlefield in Korea, not only in the battlefield in Vietnam, we fought it with ideas. And we are capable of resurfacing that same playbook again. And let me tell you what's in that playbook. There are logistics, there's intelligence, penetration of the enemy, clandestine officers, and dirty tricks. There are cultural activities, all within the framework of fighting against an enemy. There's ridicule, all in the name of fighting this threat. When I went to Eastern Europe years ago, towards the end of the fall of the Communist Empire, I remember chatting with people in the university, and if you asked the question, are you a Marxist-Leninist? They would all laugh. Because at that point, it was ridicule. Marxism, Leninism, are you kidding? It was not. We have to do the same thing with radical Islam. Make the case that it is absurd. If you want to leave this world in a box, We have a way for you to do that. But it's important for the United States to understand this is a threat. This is a long war, and it's a war that is not only fought on the battlefield, it's fought in our educational institutions, it's fought in our cultural institutions, and it's fought with our intelligence community. We are not doing that at the moment. This is the challenge. It's not only a challenge for you, it's not only a challenge for today, it's a challenge for the generation, because this too is a long war, a generational war, and we can win it. The playbook is clear. We know what we have to do. The challenge is, when do we start? Thank you very much.